Welcome to the SAP HANA Academy. My name's Bob, and in this series of videos we'll be going through SAP HANA Vora 1.3. In this series of videos we'll be going through the installation. In this second of two videos we're going to be looking at installing and configuring Apache Zeppelin to work with SAP HANA Vora. Now in the previous video what we did is we looked at installing the correct version of Apache Zeppelin for our version of Spark, which we have installed to use with SAP HANA Vora. And then we looked at combining the interpreter within SAP HANA Vora with the Apache Zeppelin Spark interpreter. What we're going to do in this video is look at further configuring Apache Zeppelin so we can actually start to use the web UI. So let's look at some further configuration of Apache Zeppelin. So to do this, I'm going to go back to my conf folder. So if I go back and do a CD into the conf folder and do a clear and an ls, what you see is that we've got these scripts, there's templates of these two scripts, Zeppelin, which lists our environment variables for Zeppelin, and there's also a zeppelin-site.xml.template file. Essentially what we need to do is copy those files. So firstly, I'll copy the template file to a file called zeppelin-env.sh. Then what we'll do is we'll change the rights in that file just so we can edit them with a chmod 0755. Again, we're modifying the sh file. And then what we'll do is we'll edit this file. So I'm going to run a sudo vi and I'm going to open up that sh file. So a sudo vi and I'm going to open up that environment file like so. So all I need to do is add some class paths. So the class paths are as follows. You can actually add them where you want in this file. If I go down above the Java home, if I do an insert by typing I and I paste, what we need to do is include our Yarn client because we're using, or should I say, we're not using a local version of Yarn. We need to then specify our Hadoop configuration directory. Again, you might want to run an ls etc Hadoop conf just to make sure that's the right one. And of course, we looked before at we need to output the Spark directory as well. And here you can see my Spark directory is like so. Now again, it's a good idea to check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this path. I'll then escape :wq exclamation mark. And just to test, I'll do an ls with that path and you can see it's the right path. So that's very important that you make sure that each of these paths work. Now that we've set up our environments file, I can run a :q exclamation mark and again I'll do a clear and we're going to copy the site file. So again it's the same sort of process as before. We're running a copy of the template file and we're going to output it into the zeppelin-site.xml. We're going to then do a chmod on that file to change the rights on the file. And lastly, again, what we're going to do is modify this file. Now for us, this contains all the connection parameters for Zeppelin for us. So if I scroll down, you'll see things like the server address, the port, we might want to look at changing various information for Zeppelin. Now all we need to do here is change the interpreter because again we're adding the SAP HANA Vora Spark interpreter. To do that, all I need to do is do a / and do a search for the word interpreter. Press return and you'll go to this big one by pressing N to the next one. And what you're actually looking for this is your Zeppelin interpreters. Now what we need to do is add our interpreter in this list, but we need to add it as the second interpreter. So all you need to do is I've got some script which I'm going to copy and paste. All I'm going to do is go to the top line and again as I said before, what you want to do is ignore the first line. So if I go back right to the beginning of this line and then go forward, this is the first interpreter which is the Spark interpreter. You don't want to put our interpreter before that. What you want to do is put it directly after. So I'm going to place it after the first interpreter. So if I type an I to insert, we're going to place it here. So if I paste here, essentially we've added the SAP Zeppelin Spark SAP SQL interpreter as the second interpreter in this file. Now again, if I press escape and I do a search for 8080, it's a good time also to change the port. So if I go next, we want to change our Zeppelin server port. So I'm going to change it to a reserved one, which is 9099. So that's the last thing you might want to do in this file as well. So when you've done that, you press escape, again :WQ exclamation mark, and again I'll just open it up again to make sure the change was made. Yes, it was. So I'll do a :Q exclamation mark. So there's one more change we need to make, but we need to make this change to Mbari. So this is where HTTP is installed. So a simple way is to do an ls/usr/HTTP, and if I press tab, it will fill in the specific version of HTTP. This is the exact version that we'll need to copy. So again, depending on your installation and when you do the installation, your version of HTTP might be slightly different. So you need to check that path. So I'm going to copy that. I'll go back to Safari and I'll go to Mbari, and what I need to do is select the yarn service. If we go to configs, what we need to do is make a change to one of the configuration files. So within configs there's an advanced tab, and what we need to do is add a property called http.version. So if I go right to the bottom here, we need to add a custom yarn site here, because we're essentially adding our own setting. So if I add a property, I'm going to call this HTTP version, and here I'm specifying the exact version of our HTTP. That's very, very important, our Hadoop implementation. So I'll click on add, and then what I'll do is I'll click on save. It'll save that configuration. If I click on OK, it's going to ask me to restart that component, so I'm going to restart all affected. So it takes a few seconds to start, but now that that's starting, we can actually go and test that Zeppelin starts OK. So once yarn has started 100%, what I can do is click on OK, and I can go to the home page of Mbari, and then back in the terminal window, I can manually start Zeppelin. So all I need to do is, if I just exit and go back in as this cluster admin user, all I need to do is run the following command, which is within the Zeppelin home folder, within the bin folder, there's a command called zeppelin-daemon.sh, and I'm going to do a restart just in case it started. It takes a few seconds to start, but of course the ultimate test is to make sure that the Zeppelin URL works. So how do you do this? Well, back in Safari, I'm going to go to a browser, and if I launch a new tab, all I need to do, of course, is copy that IP address and then put in the port, which of course for us is 9099. And this is what you should see after a few seconds. So we've got a last bit of configuration to do. Now that we're using the web UI, and even though we've combined the Spark Vora interpreter with the SAP HANA Vora interpreter, what we need to do is let Zeppelin know here in the UI that we want to use that interpreter. So how do we do this? Well, what we need to do firstly is go to the drop down here and go to our interpreters. Now if I scroll right to the bottom, these are the various interpreters that Zeppelin can use. So you can see there's one for Hive, one for Python, one for PSQL, for Postgre. There's lots of different interpreters. There's obviously one for Spark, and we just need to do a little bit of configuration here. So the safest way to do this is as follows. What I would do is remove the interpreter, and we're going to re-add the interpreter just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if I click on create, I'm going to create myself a new Spark interpreter in the Spark group. And then what we need to do is change some of these settings, as you can see here below. Now the first thing we need to do is change here. If I scroll down, you've got your master. So at the moment, it's going to connect local to the local machine when using your yarn. But we actually want to use the yarn client. So all I'm going to do is change this to yarn client. And that's why we did the configuration before at the end of the last video. So that's the first step. Now the second step is to indicate for this interpreter where our jar file is. So if I scroll down, we do that here in what are called dependencies. Now to further explain that, if I paste in an ls of this folder, which is the lib Vora Spark lib folder within our services in Mbari, you see that you've got this file which is sspark sap data sources 1388 assembly.jar. And of course, your version might be different. So as of the release date, it is version 1.3.102 or 103. All we essentially need to do is make the interpreter or make the Apache Zeppelin UI aware that this jar file exists. So we can do this by doing an ls just to get the exact path, like so. And then what I can do is I can copy this path, including the jar file. I'll copy that. I'll go back to Zeppelin, and all I'll do here in the dependency is paste that URL, and I'll click on save. So that's all you have to do. So now when I go down to Spark, all we might need to do is restart our interpreter. Again, make sure that you've got your own client for your master and you've got that dependency. They're the only things that you need to change. So when you've done that, you can here restart your interpreter for Spark, and now it will be aware that we're using SAP HANA Vora as well. And you can also see that indicated here as one of our interpreters in the list. So now that you've done that, of course, the next step would be to test that Zeppelin works and of course can connect to SAP HANA Vora. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how we can use Apache Zeppelin when using the SAP HANA Vora interpreter.